Welcome to Truth by Billie Beene. Today's date, August 3, 2025. Time in Texas about 1 p.m. I have a subscribe button in the lower right corner of my screen. Thanks for like, subscribe, and share. And for hitting the like button, that helps my channel to grow. Some of the sources I'll use today: God in the Bible, Patriot subscribers, DUTCHSINSE, How Turner, Dialogue Works, recent interview with Martin Armstrong, National Hurricane Center, Prometheus updates, deep dive, some of the things we'll cover, too, in the Atlantic. And President Trump once again prevails in many of his executive orders. And we have the UK with their britches down. And we have that money is going to the Antichrist Ukraine. So let's get started. I'm going to begin with some new tropical disturbances in the Atlantic. So we have in this area a small disturbed area coming off of Africa. We have a larger area, but both of these are predicted to turn away from the U.S. This area has 50% chance of development in the next 24 hours, 50% in 7 days, but it's moving east, northeast. It's right off the coast of North Carolina. It's predicted to turn away from the U.S. This larger area has 0% chance of development in 24 hours and a 30% chance in 7 days. But it's now moving west-northwest, but it's also predicted to come around the U.S. and turn away from the U.S. So we can say, praise the Lord for that. And now we have this from Casey Jones. Recently we saw in the Russian peninsula Kamchatka, we saw what was alleged to be an 8.8, and we know there's also a Russian nuclear submarine base in this area, and it's coming out. So we had an area something like this, and then the base with their peers for their nuclear submarines. And apparently one did receive some damage. So it's unknown what the damage could have been to Russia's nuclear submarines in this area. And now we have new information coming out about the alleged 8.8. I also found it strange that the USGS upgraded an 8.0 to an 8.7, then an 8.8. To me, that's unknown in the history of the USGS. Now it appears, and good information, excuse me, is coming out from DUTCHSINSE, and I, like him, also noticed that the buoys off of, so we have Alaska, we have the Kamchatka Peninsula, the 8.8, that the buoys did not appear to be reflecting a large tsunami. And subsequently, DUTCHSINSE took down his videos alleging an 8.8 and also a large tsunami to hit the U.S. West Coast and also Hawaii, Guam, Japan, and so forth. Now, DUTCHSINSE is bringing out that there's questions about the upgrade of the USGS to an 8.8, and that the tsunami warnings to both the U.S. West Coast and also Hawaii, Japan, and so forth don't appear to line up with what actually happened. And what actually happened appears to be maybe a 7.8 or an 8.0 that would have caused a regional tsunami that would have hit Russia. And as I brought out that information from the other source, Casey Jones, there was some damage verified by satellite to Russia's nuclear submarine base in that area that would correlate with a regional tsunami. But we did not see the large tsunamis that were being predicted for the U.S. West Coast, Hawaii, and so on, Japan. We did not see those. Now, there brings in a question, and the USGS is the only seismic organization in the world that's saying that it was an 8.8. So now we see questions, and I believe going forward, we should use multiple sources whenever the USGS is putting forth a large earthquake and tsunami warning. We need to use multiple sources, both US, European, and so on. Now, Dutch is bringing this out, that we are seeing right about 500 to 600 miles south in the Pacific Ocean, we are seeing many 4, 5, and 6s that Dutch puts forth could indicate, and this would be, we would have the U.S., we know we have the Juan de Fuca plate, we have the North American plate. Over here, we would have the Pacific plate. It appears that these swarms of large earthquakes that are taking place 400 to 500 miles south of Kamchatka could indicate a large earthquake coming, something like a high 8 or maybe a 9, that would produce actual tsunamis. So if that happens, I'll definitely be bringing forth what I believe to be good warnings for my subscribers, using multiple sources both inside the U.S. and outside the U.S. And now we have this coming forth from Martin Armstrong, a recent interview on Dialogue Works. Martin is a globally famous economist, founder of the first international hedge fund. He has offices globally. His location online is armstrongeconomics.com. Talking about NATO wants to surge 250,000 troops. And I covered that in my last video. Where are they going to get those troops? President Trump has said no U.S. troops to Ukraine. But it appears that the NATO and also Martin Armstrong's predictive software, Socrates, says that the U.S. should get out of NATO. He has communicated this information to Washington, and Washington says, yes, we know. Well, we, the American people, are also backing that move. Get us out of NATO. We know today is the 60 years or so observation of the Gulf of Tonkin false flag near Vietnam to get the American people to go to war with Vietnam. We now know about the Pearl Harbor false flag. We now know about the 9/11 false flag. We, the American people, the majority of the American people, are awake, and majority of the American people, as I've brought out in previous video, are not watching the CIA Mockingbird TV channels, nor listening to their radio, and so on. So propagandizing the American people into another war is going to be very, very difficult. Now we have also President Trump. So President Trump has not made a public statement that U.S. military would not go into Kaliningrad. Kaliningrad is a part of Russia, but it's located. So we have Russia, Belarus, Ukraine, Lithuania, Poland, and right here we have this little Russian enclave, Kaliningrad. NATO has come out and said they plan to attack Kaliningrad, we believe, about August 6 to 7 and surge with 250,000 troops. Martin Armstrong puts forth that this is an actual NATO plan, but President Trump has not made a public statement that the U.S. military will not invade a part of Russia, Kaliningrad. President Trump, I believe you need to come out and make that public statement, and need to understand the American people are awake. We do not support war. So that's going on. And we have that, we see economic moves being taken by the U.S. against Russia and threatening secondary tariffs against nations who buy oil from Russia. That would be primarily China and India. And we have that this week, President Trump, within the past 48 hours or so, made a public statement that 2 U.S. nuclear-armed subs with about 200 nukes on them have been placed within striking distance of Russia. Russia came out and responded that they have their dead hand program in place. What does that mean, dead hand? Even if Russia is attacked with nukes and no one is left, they have their dead hand man situation in place. That means that their nukes would automatically launch to take out Europe and the U.S. So what are we playing with here this week? It sounds like a lot of fire. So that's going on. Martin Armstrong also brings out that, and I've covered in previous videos since the conflict began in Ukraine in 2022, that Zelensky is an antichrist deep state puppet. He is definitely antichrist. First, legislating no Russian Orthodox churches could be in Ukraine. He also outlawed the use of the Russian language, which is spoken by half of the people in Ukraine. That would be the same as the U.S. president outlawing Spanish in the U.S. We know we have millions of people who speak both English and Spanish. But Zelensky, beginning in 2022 and 2023, outlawed the Russian Orthodox Christian religion and arrested the priest and put them in jail as POWs. Now Zelensky furthers his antichrist agenda dictated to him by the deep state that outlaws all Christian churches. So Zelensky has outlawed the Christian religion in Ukraine. Now, who is it that is aiding, abetting, and supporting with money, weapons, and intel for Ukraine? Now, there's no shadowy areas left. Zelensky, deep state puppet, now makes Ukraine an antichrist nation. Who is supporting this? That would be President Trump and the U.S. Congress. So what can we say about this? Is Ukraine the first national model to go fully antichrist? Is this a model that's then going to be transferred to the U.S.? After all, this antichrist agenda in Ukraine is being supported by the U.S. So President Trump, stop the money, the weapons, the intel to Ukraine and get the U.S. out of NATO. After all, we the people, under our Constitution, can legally change our government when it becomes a tyranny. And we can stretch this a little bit and say that the U.S. is currently supporting a tyrannical government inside Ukraine that has gone fully and publicly antichrist. So no support for Ukraine. So that's going on. Now we see the UK. I reported on my last video. So we have Russia, Belarus, Ukraine. I reported on my last video about Russia capturing MI6 and UK, British current military. I had some of the facts wrong. I'll correct those today. So they were actually captured. So we have Moldova right here, small nation. They were actually captured along the coast, not in Nikolaev. And this information comes from Hal Turner. They did capture one MI6 officer who is unidentified. They captured 2 British military officers. They captured Lieutenant Colonel Richard Carroll, and they captured Colonel Edward Blake. Both of these are current British military officers. So Britain has been caught with their britches down. And Britain came out. So the location where they were captured is Ohakiv. Britain came out immediately saying they were tourists and they were just there doing history investigations for World War II naval bases. But that's not correlating with what the Russians found. They found no beach towels and no cameras supporting that these British military and MI6 officer were there as tourists. But what they did find were maps of strategic targets inside Russia, and they found evidence, secret instructions, and disks that were encrypted with data, and records of conversations with their British staff inside UK, along with evidence that these British military officers, Lieutenant Colonel Richard Carroll and Colonel Edward Blake, were actively coordinating the Ukrainian drone strikes inside Russia. These are clearly now prisoners of war, and it's believed they will be used as bargaining chips when Russia negotiates peace with the U.S. So we see Russia clearly understands they're not necessarily at war with NATO as they are with the U.S. And recall, it was the U.S., CIA, and U.S. State Department in 2014 that overthrew the democratically elected government inside Ukraine and put in their own deep state puppets. So we see the deep state, we see the U.S. government actively involved and responsible for this current military conflict inside Ukraine. So President Trump, come out publicly and say that the U.S. military is not going to be involved, boots on the ground. Once again, clarify, not in Ukraine. Also, I believe you need to clarify, we are not going to be involved in any NATO invasions of Kaliningrad, say, an enclave of Russia, nor any other NATO conflict. The American people do not want war, and we certainly don't support this now openly anti-Christ Ukrainian government. Get us out of Ukraine, get us out of NATO. It would be a good day for American citizens and for the U.S. military. So that's going on. So we have lies and secrets and so forth going on. Now, Prepper News brings forth that the NATO is pushing for war inside Russia, actually, and it's believed that NATO may use a preemptive strike. President Trump, get us out of NATO now. And we have this from Prometheus Updates. Neocons inside the U.S. government, and that would include that puke, Lindsey Graham, known in some circles as Lady G, pushing for the U.S. to actively engage in war with Russia. We say to Lindsey Graham and all other U.S. neocons, shut up. The American people do not support war. So that's going on. And we see more information coming out, too, about Russiagate and the coup that took place in the U.S. in 2020. And we have this, yes. The U.S. has moved 2 nuclear subs and publicly made a statement by President Trump that these 2 U.S. nuclear subs were within striking distance of Russia. Well, how do you think the U.S. would respond if Russia did the same to us? And we have this from Deep Dives. The response by Russia was to say, we've put our dead man hand triggering system in place. The world appears to be on the brink of World War III. So now we know what we need to pray against. But I say this to President Trump. The U.S. needs to get out of NATO, and we need to stop all money, weapons, intel support for an Antichrist government in Ukraine. So it's good to be in prayer for America, President Trump, the U.S. military, and world peace. I love you, and I'll see you soon.